I say this all the time, our co-op office is the best. But another thing that's really cool with Akron, the first year, you just dive right into tools for engineering and you just start designing stuff like prosthetic arms, cars, using motors to build DC currents. Yeah, Akron gave me the tools to do this, like I'm ready for a job. Hi, my name's Allie Stanley and I'm a double major in biomedical engineering and Spanish at the University of Akron.
Welcome to Soapbox Derby Racing. You're about to start an adventure that you're going to remember for a lifetime, building and then racing your own Soapbox Derby car. The Soapbox Derby program is a great learning experience for kids and adults, an opportunity to develop a mutual respect and trust, individual pride and sportsmanship. I'm Jared Zimmerman, this is Brittany, this is Gavin, this is my team, and we're going to show you how to build a Soapbox Derby car. We're going to take a look at the tools you need, we're going to show you each step of the process, we're also going to give you some helpful tips that'll help you along the way, as well as show you places where you can get other information if you need it. Now the video is based on this, the written plans that came with your car's kit, and it's also designed to show you exactly how to build your car. Now you'll be building your car with the help from a parent, guardian, teacher, or mentor, like myself, and they're going to share the experience with you along the way. And if you have any questions about anything or need some clarification about plans, rules, or regulations, contact the Soapbox Derby team at their website. The website has links to useful, up-to-date information on rules and plans, ordering kits or parts online, and local race information. Now let's take a look at the tools you're going to need, Brittany, if you don't mind. All right, you're going to need 2 screwdrivers, standard flat blade, a little wider one, and a number 2 Phillips. There you go, Gavin, if you don't mind laying those out. All right, you're going to need an assortment of open-end box-end wrenches ranging from 11/32 to 3/8 to 7/16 and 1/2 inch. All very common tools, easy to find. You'll need a little bitty 5/64 Allen wrench, so don't lose that. All right, 2 sets of pliers. You'll need regular and wire cutters. What do we got next there? Tape measure. Make sure your tape measure can read at least 10 feet or measure 10 feet. Standard hammer or mallet. What next? Oh yeah, we need 2 2x4s cut to roughly 18 inches in length for support. We need a C-clamp, my favorite, battery-powered drill. You guys don't get to use this, it's all mine, okay? All right, next we got contact cement, and lastly some electrical tape. And I think that's everything. No, you know what? We're gonna need a hacksaw and masking tape. You guys wanna round that stuff up? Yeah. All right. And for tips on finishing your shell, just check out your plans or visit the website. Oh, just wait, one more thing. You might want to consider putting some tung oil treatment on your floorboard. It's going to take a couple days to dry, but it's worth it. Keeps your car looking nice, right? Yeah. All right. Next, you're going to want to poke the holes in the floorboard so you can see where they're at, and then you'll flip the board over and clean the holes up. Well, like my assistants are doing here. Nice job. Now let's take a quick tour of the floorboard and some of the steps you'll be taking during this part of the building process. Starting from the front, you will find shell hole A. Step 1 is the steering stop. Step 2 is the foot brace. Step 3 is the Kingpin and stabilizer bushing installation. Step 4 is the steering hardware. Step 5 is steering cable installation. Step 6 is the angle iron installation. Step 7 is the brake pad installation. Step 8 is the brake installation. Step 9 is the weight bolt installation. Step 10 is the airfoil installation. Step 11 is axle alignment and triangulation. Step 12 is shell installation. Step 13 is signage, lettering, and decoration. Step 14 is wheel kit installation. Step 15 is an assembly checklist. We'll also give you tune-up hints along the way. Now you should take some time and read ahead in your plans, starting with step 1, steering stop installation. All right, guys, the first thing we're going to do on our Soapbox Derby car is install the steering stop. You'll need the parts for the steering stop bag. The bag contains 4 elevator bolts, some 1/4 inch nuts, and 4 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch fender washers. So the steering stop goes here at the front of the floorboard, and this is how it gets installed. Insert one elevator bolt through the bottom of the floorboard, add a steering stop hole, and press it through the floorboard. All right, Brittany, ready for the washer? Then place a fender washer on the elevator bolt on top of the floorboard. After that, install a 1/4-inch nut on the fender washer and tighten until the elevator bolt is pulled flush with the bottom of the floorboard. Perfect. After you tighten the first nut, install 2 more 1/4-inch nuts for a total of 3, then repeat the steps for the other 3 elevator bolts. All right. So here's how the steering stop should look when you're all finished. Take care to line the nuts up so that the steering stops will land on the flat part of the nut rather than the point. Nice job, guys.
Thanks.
All right, now it's time to install the foot brace. Now the foot brace and the brake pedal from step 8 can both be moved forward or backwards in this zone to fit a driver, but you're going to want to check the plans to make sure that you fit within that zone. Get to work. Open up your foot brace bag and get your tools ready. For this, you'll need elevator bolts, fender washers, and 1/4-inch nuts. Start by inserting 2 elevator bolts through the bottom of the floorboard at the foot brace holes locations, and then press them through the floorboard. Now add a fender washer to each elevator bolt along with a nut and draw it flush with the floorboard. Then remove the washer and the nut. Place the foot brace on the elevator bolt. Add your fender washers on top of the foot brace and install your 1/4-inch nuts and then tighten them. And here's how your completed foot brace should look. Okay, team, now step 3 is a little more involved in the first 2 steps, but we can handle it, right? Okay, now this is the installation of the Kingpin, and it's going to take some sub-assembly in order to install the front and rear axles. So we're going to need the contents of the Kingpin bag and the front and rear axles. Brake, go get me some axles. Okay. Okay.
Sure.
I'm cracking the whip on you too. In the bag, you will find 1/4-inch flat washers, 1/4-inch nuts, 1/4-inch nylock nuts, also known as your Kingpin nuts, 1/4-inch by 3 1/4-inch gold-colored Kingpins, 1/4-inch by 3 1/4-inch machine bolts, 1/4-inch by 2-inch flat washers, 1/4-inch by 1 1/4-inch fender washers, and 3/8-inch bushings. Let's get started on the bushing subassembly. First, place a 1/4-inch by 1 1/4-inch fender washer on a silver machine bolt. Then place the bushing with a flat end against the fender washer on the machine bolt. Now insert the assembly through the top of the floorboard with the beveled end of the bushing against the floorboard until the bolt extends through the opposite side of the Kingpin location. Next, place a fender washer on the machine bolt against the floorboard and install a 1/4-inch nut on the machine bolt. Use your wrench to tighten the machine bolt assembly until the bushing ends are flush with the floorboard, like this. When that's done, remove the nut from the machine bolt and the fender washers and repeat all of these steps for the second Kingpin bushing location. Okay, now just repeat those steps for the stabilizer bushings in the back of the board. All right. And now we're ready for the Kingpin front subassembly. Start by placing a 1/4-inch by 2-inch flat washer, that's the big washer, on the gold Kingpin bolt. Then insert this assembly through the bottom of the floorboard at the front axle location and press it through the floorboard. After that, put a flat washer on the Kingpin, then put a fender washer on top of the 2-inch flat washer. Now put a 1/4-inch flat washer on top of the fender washer. Okay, now you're going to want to identify the front axle for this step. Now the front axle has 2 pre-drilled holes in either end, whereas the rear axle only has 1 pre-drilled hole in each end, making them easy to identify. Place the front axle on the 1/4-inch flat washer. Then put the 2 1/4-inch flat washers on top of the axle. Install a 1/4-inch nylock nut called the Kingpin nut and tighten the whole assembly. Install a second nylock nut on the front Kingpin assembly. Here's what the front axle Kingpin assembly should look like. Now we're going to move to the rear Kingpin subassembly. First, place a 1/4-inch by 2-inch flat washer on the gold Kingpin bolt. Insert the Kingpin washer assembly through the bottom of the floorboard at the rear axle location and press through the floorboard. Place the rear axle plate onto the gold Kingpin. Align the holes in the rear axle plate with those in the floorboard. Place a 1/4-inch by 2-inch flat washer on the Kingpin on top of the rear axle plate. Place a 1/4-inch by 1 1/4-inch fender washer on the Kingpin. Then place a 1/4-inch flat washer on the Kingpin and place the rear axle onto the Kingpin. Place 2 1/4-inch flat washers on top of the axle. Then install 1 1/4-inch nylock nut. You know that's the Kingpin nut. Don't completely tighten the Kingpin assembly. You'll make adjustments in step 11. And here's how the complete Kingpin subassembly looks. Okay, we are moving right along and our soapbox derby car feels good, getting some accomplishment going, right, huh? Okay, so for this next step, you're gonna need to reach into your pocket or your piggy bank because you're gonna need a quarter. Sounds weird, but I'm gonna show you why in just a second. All right, you two cough up a quarter. I know one of you got a quarter on you. Let's do it. Okay, I got one. All right, next time don't let me down. The steering bag contains 1/4-inch by 2 1/4-inch elevator bolts, 1/4-inch by 2-inch elevator bolts, a 3/32 by 1 3/4-inch cotter pin, 1/4-inch lock washers, 1/4-inch nuts, 1/4-inch flat washers, cable pulleys, and 3 1/4-inch flat washers. All right, at this point in time, you're gonna need your brake and steering mount. Also, you're gonna need that quarter. You're gonna drop that down in the recessed area where the steering shaft will go. Now, insert a 1 1/4-inch by 2-inch elevator bolt through the bottom of the floorboard at the front of the brake steering mount hole and press it through the floorboard. Then install a 1/4-inch flat washer and a 1/4-inch nut on the bolt and draw it flush with the bottom of the floorboard. Go ahead and tighten it a little bit more. Does it feel flush yet from the back? That's a good one. All right. Go ahead and remove the nut and washer. Then repeat these same steps for the second front bolt hole location. Place the brake steering mount on top of the 1/4-inch by 2-inch elevator bolts. Then place a 1/4-inch flat washer. All right. Then a lock washer on those bolts on top of the brake steering mount. Then install a 1/4-inch nut on the bolts, but don't completely tighten the nut. Feels good making progress, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Good. After you've done that, insert 1 1/4-inch by 2 and 1 1/4-inch elevator bolt through the bottom of the floorboard at the rear brake steering mount hole. Then once again, install a 1/4-inch flat washer along with a 1/4-inch nut. Tighten to draw the bolt up flush with the floorboard. This time, just remove the nut. Next, place a cable pulley on the elevator bolt on top of the brake steering mount, followed by a 1/4-inch lock washer on top of the cable pulley. When you've done that, install a 1/4-inch nut on the elevator bolt, but don't completely tighten it. Now, repeat those steps for the second rear brake steering bolt and cable pulley location. All right, now it's time to tighten the 4 nuts that hold on our brake steering bracket, but before we do that, we're going to stick the brake plunger through the brake steering bracket, also through the floorboard, and see that we have clearance. And that's how it should look. See how it slid right in there? Got a little bit of play? Perfect. Okay, now it's time to tighten the nuts. But before we do that, I want to show you guys the steering wheel. You have it? Mm-hmm. There it is. It looks like a bow tie, and it can go in either direction. But next, we're going to show you how to install it. What do you think? Mm-hmm. You ready to drive yet? Huh? I am.
Yeah. All
right, let's get cracking. First, insert the steering shaft through the round hole on the brake steering mount. Then raise the steering wheel and slide the 3 1/4-inch flat washer on the bottom of the steering wheel shaft. Push the steering wheel down through the brake steering mount hole until the shaft rests on top of the quarter that we installed in the first step. Now push the 3 1/4-inch flat washer up against the brake steering mount and insert the 3/32 by 1 3/4-inch cotter pin through the upper steering wheel shaft hole. Then bend the end of the cotter pin around the steering wheel shaft. All right, there you have it. Steering wheel installed. Now we're ready for the cables. All right, guys, now it's time to install the part designed to keep your car going down the center of your lane. That's the steering cable. There are a lot of parts in the steering cable bag, starting with the cable itself and the cable adjuster, a 1/4 by 2 1/4 elevator bolt, 3 sizes of lock washers, 2 sizes of eye bolts, a 1/4-inch cable clamp, 3 sizes of nuts, cable pulleys, and 1/4-inch by 1 1/4-inch fender washers. Okay, so the cable pulley is going to involve a little bit of subassembly in this area right here. Start by inserting one of the elevator bolts through the floorboard bottom, then press it through the floorboard. Then place a fender washer on the elevator bolt on top of the floorboard. Now install a 1/4-inch nut on the bolt and draw it flush with the bottom of the floorboard. Then remove the nut. On top of that goes the cable pulley topped by a 1/4-inch lock washer and a 1/4-inch nut. Tighten the nut, then repeat those steps for the second pulley. Our next subassembly is going to be the axle eye bolt. Start by installing a 1024 nut on the 1024 by 2-inch eye bolt. Tighten the nut to the end of the threads on the eye bolt. Insert your eye bolt assembly through the driver's side of the front axle at the eye bolt location. Now place a number 10 lock washer on the bolt, then a 1024 nut, and tighten the whole assembly. After that, repeat those steps for the second eye bolt assembly. Okay. We're ready to assemble the cable adjusters. First, put an 832 nut on the 832 by 1 5/8 eye bolt. Then insert the eye bolt through any of the 3 holes in the inside of the cable adjuster and just push it through. There you go. Put a number 8 lock washer on the eye bolt along with an 832 nut, but don't completely tighten the assembly. You'll make some adjustments to this down the road in step 11. Now repeat these steps for the second cable adjuster assembly. Cool. All right, guys, we got this cable. It's going to be in your steering cable, but before we start the sub-assembly for the steering cable, we need to go ahead and find the center point of this right here. How do you suppose we would do that?
Fold it in half.
Fold it in half. You guys are smart. All right. So we'll just take the 2 ends, we'll line them up with each other. Okay. Make sure that we get all the slack out of the cable. And that's going to give us the dead center. Then we'll take that pair of pliers if you want, Gavin, and just crimp it. Here we go, we'll turn it sideways. Nice. Maybe one more time at the tip. Crimp it like that. All right, trust you not to get my fingers. Now you're going to take the 2 loose ends of the cable and feed it through the lower hole in the steering shaft. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, can she do it? Pull the 2 loose cable ends through the hole until you form an eyelet at the center point of the steering cable. Now wrap 1 loose end around the shaft 180 degrees and thread it through the eyelet. After that, wrap the other loose cable end in the other direction around the shaft at 180 degrees from the first cable and thread it through the eyelet. Okay, now we're going to pull the slack out of those 2 loose ends and get it tight on the steering shaft like that. Excellent. Now 1 cable there again is going to go back around the back. Continue wrapping the first cable around the steering shaft 1 full wrap. That's 360 degrees. So the other one is going to go around the front and then through the back. Okay, now when you turn the wheel back towards the front of the car, that will put 1 piece of cable on either side of the brake plunger hole. And then center the steering wheel and temporarily clamp or have somebody hold it to keep it from turning. Now thread 1 cable around the steering pulley located on the brake steering mount. Then thread this cable through the outside of one of the 2 remaining holes in the cable adjuster and into the inside of the cable adjuster. Pass the end of the cable through the eye bolt and inside the adjuster, then thread the cable through the remaining hole in the cable adjuster. After you've done that, thread 1 cable around the cable pulley located on the floorboard from the front of the pulley around over the cable, which is going to keep the tensioners down towards the floorboard, and slide 2 1/4-inch cable clamps on the cable end. You guys still holding on tight? From there, thread the cable through the front axle eye bolt assembly and insert the loose end of the cable back through both cable clamps. Pull the cables tight and use a 5/64 Allen wrench to tighten both cable clamps. You can place these clamps right next to each other with no space in between or leave a little space. And just repeat that process for the other cable, but be sure to check your plan book to make sure that your cable routing is the right way for the model car that you have. Now you can adjust the steering cables by adjusting the eye bolts in the cable adjuster assemblies. After that, secure both of your cable adjusters by tightening both of the nuts. The adjusters can be located anywhere along the cable. Now you can just remove your temporary clamp, or if you got a team like I do, you can just let go of the steering wheel. But be sure to test it, and what you want to do is while you're facing the front of the car, turn the wheel to the right. Make sure that your axle turns to the right. Just like that. That is awesome. We have moving parts now. This thing's really coming together. Excess steering cable is allowed to extend past the second cable clamp and can be removed by cutting and then taping off about 1/4 inch on either side of the spot you'll cut. And this will just help keep you from having frayed edges or any sharp edges on the end of your cable. Then we're going to show you how to make further cable adjustments in step 11. Now we are really making some progress on building our car. Now it's time to move to the stabilizers on the rear floorboard. The parts include 1/4 by 2 1/4 machine bolts, round head bolts, 2-inch flat washers, nuts and lock washers, 1/4 flat washers, and 1 1/4 fender washers, along with super stock angle irons. First, we have to do an angle iron subassembly at the rear axle. Start by inserting a 1/4 by 2.5 round head bolt through the back side of the rear axle at the stabilizer bolt hole location right here. The bolt should be tight to the axle. Place a 1/4 inch lock washer on the round head bolt, then a nut onto the lock washer and tighten. Repeat those steps for the second stabilizer bolt hole. Now install a second nut onto the round head bolt, leaving an inch or so gap between the axle and the second nut. What did you say, you call that about an inch? Yeah. Place a 1/4 inch flat washer against the second 1/4 inch nut. Then repeat those steps for the second stabilizer bolt hole. After that, slide the angle iron over the 2 bolts, keeping the bottom leg flat against the super stock rear axle plate. Oh, bravo. Place a 1/4 inch flat washer on the round head bolt, then a 1/4 inch lock washer, followed by a nut over the lock washer. But don't completely tighten because there's a couple adjustments yet to come. Now repeat those steps for the second stabilizer bolt hole. The angle iron should be parallel with the rear axle. By maintaining the gap, the holes in the bottom leg of the angle iron should be aligned with those on the rear axle plate and the floorboard. Now tighten both sets of 1/4 inch nut assemblies on each side of the angle iron. Now we're going to sub-assemble the angle iron at the floorboard. Start by placing a 1/4 inch by 2 inch flat washer on a 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inch machine bolt. Insert the bolt assembly through the bottom of the floorboard at the stabilizer bushing location and press it through the floorboard, rear axle plate, and angle iron. Place a 1/4 inch flat washer onto the machine bolt. Add a lock washer and a 1/4 inch nut, but don't completely tighten because once again you're going to make further adjustments in step 11. Repeat these steps for the second stabilizer bolt hole. All right, gang, we've assembled the parts that are going to help you steer down the hill and stay in your lane, right? Now it's on to the brakes, the parts that are going to help you stop. Which part's more important, do you think? Stopping or going? There are only a few parts to deal with in this first step. Flat head bolts, 1/4 inch nuts, along with the brake pad plunger. To build the brake pad, you start by inserting a 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch flat head bolt through each hole of the brake pad. The thick black side should be facing towards the ground. Now align the bolts in the brake pad with the holes in the flat bottom of the plunger and insert the plunger. Place a 1/4 inch silver lock nut on the flat head bolt and tighten the assembly. We recommend that about 1/8 of an inch of the flat head bolt, or 3 threads, will be exposed. The flathead bolt will be recessed in the bottom of the brake pad, like this. Now just use those same steps for the other 3 bolts. Now installing the brakes is a multi-step process, but if you take your time and pay attention to the details, you'll do just fine. You'll need the parts in the brake bag and the brake pad plunger assembly from step 7, the brake spring and some tape. The parts in the brake bag include 2 sizes of elevator bolts, eye bolts, flathead screws, machine bolts, nuts, lock washers, cable clamps, fender washers, cable pulleys, the awning pulley, flat washers, and spacers. Okay, so the brake pedal from this step and then the foot brace from step 2 are able to be moved forward and backward in this zone to fit a driver. Now you're going to want to check your plans to make sure that you get them in the right location. But the first step for us now, moving on to the brakes, is to build the hinge assembly. Start by aligning the 4 hinge holes with the brake pedal. The top of the wood brake pedal has rounded corners and the bottom is straight. The 5th hole at the rounded corner is for the brake pedal eye bolt. Next, insert a flathead bolt through the brake pedal, then through one of the 4 hinge holes. Add a 1/4 inch lock washer on the flathead bolt, then a nut, but don't completely tighten it. Looking good. All right, so you're going to want to repeat that step for the next 3 bolts. You're going to want to continue to tighten the nuts till the heads of the bolts are flush with the brake pedal. Then it's onto the brake pedal eye bolt subassembly. Let's install a 1/4 inch nut on the eye bolt and tighten the nut to the end of the threads. That looks tight. Yeah. Then place a fender washer on the eye bolt and insert the assembly through the hole in the wood brake pedal on the opposite side of the hinge. Now place a fender washer on the brake pedal eye bolt assembly, install a lock washer on top of the fender washer, then a nut on the bolt and tighten the assembly. Okay, now we're going to work on the brake pedal hinge subassembly right here on the front of the floorboard. Start by aligning the 2 outer holes of the brake pedal hinge with the holes in the floorboard at the brake pedal location. By the way, the center hole of the hinge isn't used. Now insert a 1/4 by 2 inch elevator bolt through the floorboard bottom at the brake pedal hole location and press it through the floorboard and brake pedal hinge hole. Then a 1/4 inch lock washer, followed by a nut over the lock washer, but don't completely tighten because there's a couple adjustments yet to come. All right, so we're just going to repeat those steps for the second bolt. We're going to draw those nuts down until the bolts are flush with the bottom of the floorboard. Then it's off to the brake steering mount, where we're going to assemble the sub-assembly for the cable pulley system. First, insert a 1/4 inch by 1 inch machine bolt through the cable pulley and place a 1/4 inch flat washer on the machine bolt. Now insert the machine bolt with a cable pulley and flat washer through the hole on the left side of the vertical plate of the brake steering mount and place a lock washer on the assembly. Place a nut on the lock washer, then tighten. This cable pulley should spin freely. Then we'll move right on to the plunger sub-assembly. First, install a 1/4 inch nut onto a 1/4 by 2.5 inch eye bolt and tighten it to the end of the threads. Insert the square tube end of the brake plunger assembly through the bottom of the floorboard at the large round hole of the brake steering mount and push it through the top of the brake steering mount. All right, hold that there for a second. Now, place the brake spring on the brake plunger. Compress the spring coil and insert the eye bolt assembly through the hole of the plunger. The eye bolt faces the rear of the car. Next, place a lock washer on the eye bolt assembly and a nut on the eye bolt and tighten that assembly. Yeah, you're right. Oh, look at me. Okay, now we need to make sure that it operates smoothly. You want to do the honors?
Yeah.
All right, push it down. Looking good. Would you trust that?
Yeah.
All right, so now it's on to the awning pulley sub-assembly. Okay, let's do it. Insert a 1/4 inch by 2.25 inch elevator bolt through the floorboard bottom at the awning pulley hole location and place a fender washer on the bolt on top of the floorboard. You ready with the wrench? Install a 1/4 inch nut. Tighten it to draw the elevator bolt flush with the bottom of the floorboard. Then remove the nut. Add a spacer. Put the awning pulley on the spacer. Do you know that was called an awning pulley?
No.
I did not either. And a 1/4 inch flat washer on the pulley. Add a lock washer and a nut. Okay, once the awning pulley is on, it should move freely and be pointed towards the front of the car. Now we're ready to tighten that nut. We're just making sure it's not bound up in the assembly. The final brake sub-assembly is the cable. Start by sliding 2 cable clamps on one end of the brake cable. Then thread the end of the brake cable about 6 inches through the pedal eye bolt to create a loop around the eye bolt. Now thread the cable back through the 2 cable clamps and tighten them with a 5/64 Allen wrench. Next, thread the other end of the brake cable through the awning pulley, then through the cable pulley at the brake steering mount. Slide 2 cable clamps on the cable and continue the cable up through the brake plunger eye bolt. Now insert the loose end of the cable back through the cable clamps to create a loop around the eye bolt. Pull the loose end of the cable tight and tighten the cable clamps with your Allen wrench. All right, we've got our brake mechanism all hooked up. Now it's time for the fun part, testing it. You want to do it?
Sure.
All right, let's make sure it's got a smooth operation. Looking good. What do you think? Finalize it?
Yeah.
Okay, for that, we're just going to put the final tighten on our clamps on both ends. That feels good. All right, then we're going to trim off some of that excess cable and then go back with our black electrical tape once again to keep there from being any frayed ends. You want to get the wire cutters for me?
Sure.
Thank you, nurse. Tee-hee. All right, Gav, this next part, installing the weight bolts, it's pretty easy, actually. You ready to do it?
Yep.
All right. And there are only a few parts to deal with. A 6-inch long carriage bolt, fender washers, flat washers, nuts, and wing nuts. To install the weight bolts, insert the threaded end of one of your 6-inch carriage bolts through the floorboard bottom at the weight hole and press it through the floorboard. Place a flat washer onto the carriage bolt, followed by a nut, then tighten the bolt assembly. Now just repeat those steps for the second weight bolt location. All right, now to reach your optimal weight, you may need to add weight to your car. Now you're going to do that at either the front or rear of those 6-inch bolts. The other thing you need to know is that you have to add the washer and then the wing nut on top of the weight. And even if you don't run weight, you still need to add the washer and the wing nut, right guys? Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's the rules. So the other thing to remember is that you may or may not even need to add weight to get to your target weight. Now your car kit comes with airfoils. That's pretty high tech, pretty cool, huh? All right, and all you need to install those is just some drywall screws and finish washers, so let's get started. For your super stock car, the front airfoil needs to be cut just like this. For the front axle, slide the airfoil over the front axle square stock. The airfoil must not extend into the spindle portion of the axle. Place a drywall screw through the finish washer and insert the screw with the washer through the rear surface of the axle square stock, and then tighten the assembly with a hand screwdriver. Repeat those steps for the second airfoil hole attachment and the second front axle airfoil. By the way, you are not allowed to paint or cover the airfoils in any way, shape, or form. So let's move to the rear axle. And it's a lot like the front axle. You're just going to slip the airfoil over the rear axle square stock without the airfoil extending into the spindle area. You want to keep that flush. Clamps on real nice. It's a great fit. You press it on and just hold itself. Start putting your screws in. Place a drywall screw through a finish washer and insert them through the rear surface of the axle square stock and tighten the assembly with a hand screwdriver. Repeat those steps for the second airfoil hole attachment and the second rear axle airfoil. All right, guys, our car is built, but not quite ready for the track, okay? We want to do the right thing to keep you heading straight down your groove, right in the center line, keep the car tracking straight, and that's going to be where we do our axle alignment and triangulation. Now for that, I'm going to show you how to do it with a tape measure, so it's nice and simple. The great thing is, either car you build, you're going to be able to use these same steps, okay? So, the goal here is to get our rear axle at a right angle relative to the body and the floorboard, okay? And that's what's going to keep us going straight down the track, all right? Then, once we have that achieved, we'll be able to just tighten everything down, and we'll be good to go. Grab me a tape measure. Let's do this. Oh, I got it. When this happens, it makes your car appear as narrow as possible when it goes down the hill and reduces drag from air resistance. If the axle isn't at the right angle, the body of the car isn't pointed straight down the hill. You'll think your car isn't going straight, and you'll turn too frequently to correct this, and this is just going to slow your car down. Triangulation uses the front kingpin and two outer points of the axle. Both the front and rear kingpin are drilled so that they are on a center line of the floorboard, so they're in a straight line to each other. The rear axle spindles are equal distances from the axle center kingpin. Here's how you use a tape measure to do your triangulation. You'll have to remove the brake pedal cable since it'll be in the way of the tape measure. Drill a 1/4-inch hole near the end of the tape measure. Take off the first nut only of the front axle kingpin. Slide the 1/4-inch hole end of the tape measure over the front axle kingpin. Slide out the tape measure to compare the measurements of the right and left sides of the rear axle. When both sides are equal distances, the axle is aligned. Help me with the steering wheel, Brittany. Thank you. Oh yeah, we're dead on. You know what that means? Time to tighten up the stabilizer nuts. All right, now it's time to move on to the front axle alignment. You're going to want to make sure that the front axle is aligned so that the steering wheel is properly centered so the car goes down the track in a straight line. Alrighty, time for the front axle alignment. So I'll hand you that and hook it over the back axle. I'm going to check that. Okay, that's at 63.5. I like having you up front. That way you can look right down on the tape measure and make sure that we're being precise. Okay, now let's go to the other side here. Make sure that our steering wheel stayed centered. It sure has. And we are off. So now we're only at a 63.25 here. We got 63.5 over there. That means we need to increase the tension on the left side of the axle, which is going to pull the axle back a little bit, that 1/8 inch, and get us into alignment. So we're going to do that right here. Tighten or loosen the steering cables at the cable adjuster eye bolt until the length is exactly the same on both sides. Tighten the nuts on both sides of the cable adjuster. Check the measurement to ensure that it is equal. Now the steering cable should be tight, but not so tight that it bows the front axle. Make sure that the axle turns the same direction as the steering wheel. Tighten all parts of the steering assembly as shown in step 5. Okay, now that our triangulation is complete, you sure don't want to forget to hook up your brake pedal or put that top kingpin nut on your front axle. Safety first. All right, it is time to get your shell ready and install it on the floorboard. You will need drywall screws, finish washers, foam, your shell, your floorboard assembly, adhesive, and tape. Okay, to get started on our shell, we're going to want to determine the front center point of the shell cockpit, all right? Then we're going to want to make a temporary mark on it, and that is going to help us determine where the center of our foam is. You're one step ahead of me, I like that. Now apply some adhesive to the surfaces and install the foam. All right, the magic here, the secret trick is to line it up in the middle. And then Gavin, if you want to hold that foam for me, that way I can work this edge around without worrying about that one getting stuck. Be sure to keep the top of your foam flush with the top of the shell. You need to use the entire foam piece without cutting or changing it. Use some tape to hold the foam in place while the adhesive sets. Now it's time for a very cool part, attaching the shell to the floorboard. For that, you're going to need to raise the floorboard off of the ground. You could use the two 2x4s that we showed earlier, but we're using some sawhorses. No big deal. All right, one of the things you want to look for is working the shell down onto the floorboard without binding the cables or the axles. You guys ready to try it? Yep. All right, bring it into place. I'm going to make you put it up over my head. Oh yeah. Okay, so we're just going to work the body out and around all of the obstructions. So looking like we're good and lined up on that side. Push it out over here. How you doing back there, Gav? Good. Your hands clear? Okay, now you want to make sure that the body sits flush with the bottom of the floorboard, not below it. And the front's lifting up a little bit? Yeah. Okay. That's all right, we'll get to it. Oh, it's way up, you're right. There we go, how about that? A little better, huh? Okay, we're looking good. So now it's time to start putting some screws in, and we'll go from there. Insert a drywall screw through a finish washer, then through location A at the front center of the car. This isn't a pre-drilled hole. Okay, Brittany, that looks good. All right, one of the things you want to make sure of is that the bottom of the shell is flush with the bottom of the floorboard. I'd say that's pretty good. You're not allowed to have a gap between the shell and the floorboard at the nose of the car. Working front to back, insert another drywall screw with a finish washer through other shell holes of the car and tighten the assembly until the shell is tight to the floorboard. Repeat this process until all of the shell holes are filled with the screw and washer assemblies. All right, now it's time to check for proper clearances and things like your steering cables and axles. If you find that there's any interruption, you can trim the body shell a little bit to make sure they have proper movement. Oh yeah, you are headed for the finish line now. Your steering's working, your brakes are working, you got your body shell attached to the floorboard. I think it's time to make this car your own. Now just refer to your plans for proper decal placement. And remember, with Super Stock, you can paint the car, and with stock, you cannot. Now your car is ready for its wheels. Right, gang? All right. So your wheel kit is going to include wheel washers, wheel pins, and Z-glass wheels. Well, what are you waiting for? Let's put them on. This step is quick and easy. Simply place a Z-glass wheel on an axle spindle, followed by the wheel washer. Next, install a wheel pin from the front of the axle through the horizontal hole in the axle spindle. The round part of the wheel pin faces the front of the car. You don't have to use washers, but if you want to, you can use up to 2 washers per spindle. Repeat this step for the other 3 wheels. And now that your wheels are on, you are done. All right, guys, you've been a good team. Nice work. The way I see it, we only got one thing left to do. Let's go race it.
Yeah!